The wind that night carried the kind of cold that sliced through bone. It swept through the dusty streets of Red Hollow like a restless ghost, rattling wooden signs and pushing loose dirt across the road in thin twisting spirals. Lanterns flickered outside the saloons and shops, casting long shadows that danced across the buildings. Most of the town had already gone quiet. Doors were locked, curtains drawn, and the few people still outside hurried along with their heads down. Nobody liked wandering the streets of Red Hollow after dark, not when the most feared man in town was known to drink at the Rusty Spur saloon every evening. Caleb Ward. The name alone made troublemakers reconsider their choices. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and carried the kind of presence that made a room fall silent the moment he entered. Rumors about him traveled faster than stagecoaches. Some said he once shot a man across the street without even standing up from his chair. Others claimed he had hunted down an entire gang by himself after they stole his horses. Nobody could say for sure which stories were true. But nobody doubted one thing: Caleb Ward was dangerous. And that was exactly the man Emily Carter was looking for. She stood outside the Rusty Spur saloon, her fingers gripping the handle of a small worn suitcase. The leather was cracked from travel, and dust from the long train journey still clung to her coat. The wind tugged at her dress and stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing too fast. Just hours earlier she had stepped off the train believing her new life was about to begin. She had imagined a man waiting for her on the platform. Maybe nervous, maybe shy, but ready to greet the woman he had asked to marry. Instead, the station platform had been empty. She had waited nearly an hour before asking the station master about the man who had written her those letters. Tom Willis. The old station master had removed his hat and sighed. "Miss," he had said carefully, "that man left town 3 days ago. Took what money he had and disappeared after cheating half the card tables in this county." Those words had felt like the ground vanished beneath her feet. Everything she had depended on, every hope she carried across hundreds of miles, had collapsed in a single moment. She had no money left after the journey. No family nearby. No friends. Nothing except the small suitcase she carried. And Red Hollow was not the kind of town that treated lonely women kindly. The sun had already begun to set when she overheard two men talking near the general store. They were speaking quietly, but one name kept coming up. Caleb Ward. One man had muttered, "Nobody messes with a woman under Caleb Ward's roof." The other had laughed nervously. "That's because nobody's stupid enough to test him." Those words had planted an idea inside Emily's desperate mind. Now she stood staring at the swinging doors of the Rusty Spur saloon, wondering if she had completely lost her senses. Inside those doors were gamblers, drunks, and outlaws. And somewhere among them sat the most ruthless cowboy in town. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Every sensible thought told her to walk away. To find somewhere else. To try anything but this. But she had already run out of choices. Emily took a breath, pushed open the doors, and stepped inside. The smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke filled the air. Rough laughter echoed across the room as cards slapped against wooden tables. A piano in the corner played a crooked tune while boots stomped against the floor. Then someone noticed her. The music stumbled to a stop. Conversations faded into murmurs as dozens of men slowly turned their heads toward the doorway. A young woman standing alone inside a place like this was about as common as snow in summer. Emily felt heat rush to her cheeks as the attention settled on her. A few cowboys grinned. One man nudged his friend and whispered something that made them both chuckle. But she kept walking. Her boots tapped softly across the floorboards as she moved deeper into the room. She could feel eyes following every step. Near the back wall sat a man alone at a table, a bottle of whiskey resting beside his hand. His hat was pulled low, casting a shadow over his face, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in the way he carried himself. Caleb Ward. Even sitting down he looked dangerous. His broad shoulders filled the chair, and the worn revolver at his hip seemed like a natural extension of his hand. A faint scar ran along his jawline, pale against sun-browned skin. As Emily approached, Caleb slowly lifted his eyes. The moment their gazes met, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Emily stopped in front of his table. Up close, the rumors about him suddenly felt very real. His eyes were sharp and unreadable, studying her like a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or ignore. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Finally Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression calm but cautious. "You lost, little lady?" he asked. His voice was deep and steady, carrying easily through the quiet room. Emily swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly around the suitcase handle. But she had come too far to turn back now. "Please marry me," she said. The reaction was instant. Laughter burst from every corner of the saloon. One gambler nearly choked on his drink while another slapped the table in disbelief. Did she just ask Caleb Ward to marry her? Lord help us, someone muttered between laughs. But Caleb didn't laugh. He simply stared at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to decide whether this was a joke. "Say that again," he said slowly. Emily forced herself to meet his gaze. "My name is Emily Carter," she said quietly. "I came here to marry a man who sent for me as a mail-order bride. But he ran away. I have nowhere to go." The laughter around them faded as curiosity replaced amusement. Emily took a shaky breath. "I heard people say nobody in this town dares cross Caleb Ward," she continued. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke the desperate truth that had brought her there. "So I thought, if I married the most feared cowboy in Red Hollow, maybe I'd finally be safe." The church in Red Hollow was small, crooked, and smelled faintly of dust, candle wax, and old wood. It sat at the far edge of town where the lantern lights faded and the prairie began stretching endlessly into darkness. The building leaned slightly to one side as if the wind had been arguing with it for years and slowly winning. Inside, the preacher had been asleep in a chair with a half-empty bottle beside his boot when the door suddenly swung open. Cold night air rushed inside. The old man jerked awake, blinking through the dim lantern light. "Caleb," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "What in heaven's name?" "Need you to marry us," Caleb Ward said. The preacher stared at him. Then his eyes slowly moved toward the young woman standing beside the most feared cowboy in Red Hollow. Emily Carter looked nervous, her hands folded tightly in front of her coat. Her cheeks were still flushed from the cold and the shock of everything that had happened in the last hour. The preacher blinked again. "Marry you?" he asked slowly. "Yes," Emily said softly. The old man looked from her to Caleb, then back again as if trying to piece together a puzzle that made absolutely no sense. "I must still be dreaming," he muttered. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and placed 2 heavy gold coins on the small wooden table beside the preacher. The coins clinked loudly in the quiet church. That sound alone seemed to wake the preacher fully. He sighed deeply, standing up with a groan as his joints cracked. "Well," he said, straightening his collar, "I suppose the Lord works in mysterious ways." 10 minutes later, the small church witnessed the strangest wedding Red Hollow had ever seen. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, only the flicker of candlelight and the quiet voice of the preacher reading the vows while Emily and Caleb stood side by side. Emily's heart pounded as she repeated the words. She barely knew the man standing beside her. In fact, the entire conversation between them had lasted less than 5 minutes before he led her out of the saloon and into the night. But she also knew something else. Without this marriage, she would have been alone in a town full of rough men who had already been staring at her like wolves circling prey. When the preacher finally finished and closed the worn Bible in his hands, he looked at them both with tired eyes. "Well," he said, "by the authority given to me, you are now husband and wife." Emily Carter had just become Emily Ward. The moment felt strange and unreal. Caleb nodded once, then immediately turned toward the door. "Let's go," he said. Emily blinked. "Go where?" "My ranch." The word ranch sounded comforting compared to the uncertainty of the town behind them. Outside, the cold wind had grown stronger. Caleb's horse stood tied to a post nearby, its breath rising in clouds beneath the moonlight. Caleb untied the reins and helped Emily climb onto the saddle first. Then he mounted behind her. "Hold on," he said simply. The horse began moving through the quiet streets of Red Hollow. Most of the town had gone dark, though a few saloons still glowed with lantern light and distant laughter. Emily glanced back once as they rode away, wondering if she would ever understand how her life had changed so suddenly in a single evening. The town slowly disappeared behind them. Soon they were riding across open prairie beneath a sky filled with stars. The moon hung low above the hills, casting silver light across the frozen grass. For a long time neither of them spoke. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves filled the silence. Emily finally gathered enough courage to speak. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Caleb didn't answer right away. The wind carried the sound of distant coyotes somewhere across the plains. "Yes, I did," he finally said. Emily frowned slightly. "Why?" Caleb's voice was calm but distant. "Because you walked into a room full of men who wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of you." "I was desperate," Emily admitted. That much was obvious. She hesitated before speaking again. "But you could have refused." Caleb looked ahead into the darkness. "Maybe." Emily lowered her eyes slightly. "I know you probably think I'm foolish." "No." The single word surprised her. "You were brave," Caleb continued. "Walking into that saloon took more courage than most men in this town have." Emily didn't know what to say to that. The horse continued climbing a small hill until the outline of a house appeared in the distance. A modest ranch house stood near a wooden barn, its lantern light glowing warmly through the windows. Emily felt a small wave of relief. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt like she might actually have somewhere safe to sleep. But as they approached closer, Caleb suddenly pulled the reins tight. The horse stopped instantly. Emily noticed it too. The front door of the house was wide open. The lantern inside swung slowly back and forth. Caleb's entire posture changed. His hand moved slowly toward the revolver at his hip. "What's wrong?" Emily whispered. He didn't take his eyes off the house. "Stay behind me." They dismounted quietly. The wind creaked the loose hinges of the open door as they stepped closer. Emily could hear her own breathing growing faster. Caleb pushed the door open the rest of the way. The sight inside made Emily gasp. The room was completely wrecked. Chairs lay overturned across the floor. The wooden table had been split down the middle, one leg snapped off. A cupboard door hung broken from its hinges, dishes scattered everywhere. Something heavy had been dragged across the floor, leaving deep scratches in the wood. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then a voice echoed from the shadows near the far wall. "Well, well." Caleb Ward finally came home. Emily froze. 3 men stepped forward into the lantern light. Each of them held a gun. The man in the middle wore a long black coat and a crooked smile. "Been waiting for you," he said. Emily's stomach dropped. "Who are they?" she whispered. Caleb's voice turned cold. "Men who think killing me will make them rich." The outlaw laughed softly. "Not just rich." His eyes shifted toward Emily. "But tonight it looks like we get an extra prize." Caleb instantly stepped forward, placing himself directly between the men and Emily. "You touch her," he said slowly, "and I promise none of you leave this ranch alive." The outlaw leader tilted his head, amused. "Oh Caleb, always so protective." His finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "But here's the funny part." He grinned wider. "We knew you were bringing her here tonight." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You've been watching all evening," the outlaw replied. Emily suddenly understood the terrifying truth. Someone in Red Hollow had told these men everything. Which meant their marriage wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It had already become part of a deadly plan.